electric cars charging up the roadways.
This is the future. The future is now.
The Volts and Leafs have been released, so who's winning the race at dealerships? A look at the two EVs vying to be the king of the electric road. China's booming economy and its growing demand on the world's energy supply. Too many cars, too little oil. Why a transportation crunch has China considering some bizarre travel options. And President Obama's new budget, billions more for clean energy, cuts for oil and gas.
Why are we not investing in the energy sources of the future, just the ones in the past?
But would it be money well spent? Our mixed panelists break it all down. This is Energy Now. Hello, I'm Tyler Suiters. Welcome to Energy Now, a weekly look at America's energy challenges and what we're doing about them. This week, we look at transportation, specifically cars. We are driving a lot of them, and we're using more and more of the world's dwindling oil supply to do so, and not just here in the U.S. Over the last 2 years, China has emerged as the world's biggest auto market. The International Energy Agency says over the next 25 years, China's oil consumption could double. So what's the answer? We'll look at alternatives like electric vehicles later in the show. President Obama is pushing for energy innovation in his budget, and we'll talk about that in the mix. Up first, a look at China's impact on the world's energy supplies. I traveled there to see its auto issues firsthand, its growing demand for oil, and some potential solutions. All part of Energy Now's continuing look at the China factor. Beijing is bustling, it's busy, it's bursting at the seams. Everyone's in a hurry, but no one actually gets anywhere all that fast. China, you see, has too many cars and too little oil. That's part of the reason China went from using nothing but its own oil back in 1993 to importing more than 50% of its oil today. That's 0 to 50 in less than 20 years.
Somebody quoted recently said the last 5 years refinery, the new refinery they built, all the new additional oil, petrol, was all used for transportation.
Beijing's 4 million cars pack every freeway, highway, byway, throughway, and tollway, and only a few of those take you in a straight line at a decent speed. And demand is growing.
Income increase is a major driver for people to buy car. They got rich. They want to show this is maybe the better way to enjoy life.
80% of our buyers today are first-time buy.
In China?
In China.
80%?
Yeah, first-time buy.
The sign of a burgeoning market, right?
And so the needs are very concrete. It's not like they can put off a few years to get a new car, right?
They need it now.
Yeah, they need it now.
We found that Beijingers are pretty quick to complain about the traffic problem in their city, and with very good reason. A transportation official says during the first half of 2010, this city saw the addition of almost 2,000 cars on its roads every single day. You do the math over the course of an entire year, and you can see why this city is facing an imminent problem regarding gridlock. But one Beijing company has an interesting solution to the problem, as long as the solution actually works. The idea is the Straddle Bus, part DC Metro, part Disney monorail. No gasoline needed, just electricity, the solution to both of Beijing's problems. Fewer cars competing on the road, and fewer barrels of oil burned in traffic. The thing is, this future exists only on a computer disk. The present, well, it's not much more than a glorified Lionel train set in an unfinished office space outside Beijing. Oh, so you can... That's where I met the brains behind the Straddle Bus, businessman Yozhuo Song, just a man and his model.
I have a car parking company and thought about parking cars in the air, and that's how I got this idea.
Song's company uses adjectives in English like satisfying and harmonious to describe that idea, very Zen-like. The final product, should it happen, a 1,200-passenger electric bus with no carbon emissions. But other than this model and the toy cars and trucks surrounding it, all of which are in pretend traffic, the Straddle Bus still isn't much more than just an underfunded idea.
We have enough money to start the project, but we need more money, enough money to finish.
Even outside the big cities, traffic trouble is lurking. Back in August, this traffic jam north of Beijing made international headlines. 60 miles of gridlock that didn't fully clear for 11 days. We drove that highway for ourselves one afternoon, and here's what I saw. Cars blowing by us at about 100 miles an hour. I think we were doing 80 at the time. Fast, yeah, but not as fast as this. This is the latest addition to China's high-speed rail system, the Shanghai-Hangzhou line, the fastest in the world. It can hit more than 260 miles an hour, and it doesn't use any oil. Everything is electric. And that's a big sell with Beijing. Americans go through far more oil on a daily basis, but the Chinese are fretting about their imports just as much as we are.
I think people do feel you cannot go on with like 98% of the car in China was propelled, drive by petrol, gas. So they need to look at alternative fuel.
GM is banking that alternative fuel is going to be electricity. We test drove GM's electric Volt model on the Nine Dragons course outside Shanghai.
We have manual. Okay.
And we test rode one of GM's concept cars there as well, the Envy. In fact, Energy Now was the very first North American media ever to try out GM's finished concept models. Here's why GM thinks the Envy will be such a huge hit in countries like China with big urban populations. You remember the scenes in Beijing and Shanghai in traffic with people and cars everywhere? Well, the Envy is a vehicle that can stop for pedestrians that get into its way, even when the driver isn't paying any attention at all. Yeah, pretty cool stuff, if it works. But all that smart tech would still have to be powered by China's electricity, and almost 80% of that electricity comes from burning coal. Unlike oil, China has plenty of coal to go around. But like oil, coal has high carbon emissions. Bad for the environment.
In the near future, China have more renewable energy, make the CO2 emission from electric cars much lower than gasoline and diesel-based car.
But consumer research firm J.D. Power says only 7% of the cars sold around the world in the year 2020 will run on electricity. Unless, before then, Beijing decides otherwise.
One of the things about a stronger government is that they can mobilize cross industries. So the energy industry, car industry, and state grid power, and they try to work together.
So a policy decision is made and the government can get everyone moving in the same direction.
They're absolutely more enforceful.
GM, for one, says by the end of this year, the Chinese will have 17 million more cars on their already clogged roads. That would break last year's sales record by more than 30%. So even as the Chinese try to kick the habit, they are going to need more oil than ever before. And a quick note on the Straddle Bus company. It recently signed a contract to build a 43-mile road for that bus in Brazil. That country is now the world's 4th largest car market. The project is scheduled to be completed by the end of next year. Now let's get you plugged in to some of the top energy news. The world's largest publicly traded oil company, ExxonMobil, is having trouble finding its primary product. Exxon's annual report says it's replacing only 95% of the oil it has already pumped out of the ground. The company is making up for the shortfall with a large stockpile of natural gas. In fact, Exxon now has more natural gas in reserve for future production than it does oil. Analysts tell the Wall Street Journal it's a trend throughout the oil industry and that the low price of gas compared to oil will pinch profits. That's leading to riskier oil operations like deepwater drilling in the Gulf of Mexico or exploring off the coast of Alaska. Another oil giant, Chevron, has been ordered to pay residents of Ecuador nearly $9 billion for oil drilling damages. That's one of the largest awards ever in an environmental lawsuit. Residents of Ecuador's northern jungle say drilling by Texaco in the 1970s and 80s resulted in toxic wastewater that poisoned hunting and fishing grounds and caused cancer deaths. Chevron, which bought Texaco in 2001, says it will appeal, and it has won a temporary injunction in a U.S. court against enforcement in the event Chevron does lose that case. And poor oversight of the nation's oil and natural gas reserves could be costing us, taxpayers, billions of dollars. The Government Accountability Office says the Interior Department can't keep track of how much oil and natural gas is being produced on federal leases, and it may be getting shortchanged on royalties. That is one of the nation's largest sources of non-tax revenue, averaging about $9 billion a year. And couldn't the government really use that kind of money right about now? Couldn't we all? Coming up, the big energy winners and losers in President Obama's proposed budget. We'll mix it up with our panelists. Plus, the battle of the EVs, the Volt versus the Leaf. Now that they're in showrooms and on the road, who's pulling ahead in the race to be king of the electric road?
Across the nation, elderly, disabled, and other families in need live in unsafe homes because they can't afford crucial repairs. Rebuilding Together is their best hope.
Rebuilding Together's purpose is to preserve affordable homeownership for our nation's millions of low-income homeowners.
Each year, we repair over 10,000 homes, making them safe and more energy efficient at no cost to the owner. Our work stabilizes neighborhoods and revitalizes communities. Learn how to impact your community at rebuildingtogether.org.
Why are we not investing in the energy sources of the future, just the ones in the past, particularly if the energy sources of the past are highly profitable right now and don't need a tax break?
President Obama delivered his proposed 2012 budget to Congress this past week, and it includes $8 billion for clean energy projects. Also included $36 billion for nuclear loan guarantees, $550 million to the Energy Department's ARPA-E program. This is the program that promotes innovation. Getting cut fossil fuel subsidies, down $3.6 billion. The Republicans, of course, have a very different take on our energy future. For this year's budget, they want to cut $3 billion from the EPA, as well as a $107 million cut to climate change funding. Some very big differences here. Joining us for this week's Mix to discuss all this and more, Energy Now contributor Frank Maisano. He is a senior principal at the international law firm Bracewell, Giuliani, which represents a number of power utilities and also renewable energy firms. And Energy Now contributor Daniel Weiss. He's a senior fellow at the left-leaning think tank Center for American Progress. Gentlemen, good to have you both back with us.
Thanks for having me.
Good to be here.
Let's dive right into this budget process. Frank, let's start with you. Is the president putting too much money, too much emphasis on clean energy?
Certainly the president is outlining his priorities in clean energy, advancing renewables and advancing electric vehicles and some nuclear and things like that, all at the expense of the oil and gas industry, who really take it on the chin in this budget.
This is an invest and grow budget. President Obama is investing in innovation, in ARPA-E to develop advanced technologies, in high-speed rail, in wind and solar technologies. This is a budget for the future.
Funding everything across the board sounds like a nice idea, but the reality is someone has to lose. Is it oil and gas right now?
Well, certainly
fossil fuels overall?
Certainly fossil fuels and oil and gas are not on the president's priority list. Of course, he's not the one who decides in total what happens. Certainly, we've heard not only from Republicans a much different take, but we've also heard that from Democrats as well.
Oil and gas industry in this country is incredibly profitable. The 5 biggest oil companies have made $75 billion in profits. Their federal effective tax rate is about half that of your average citizen. We're cutting out $3.5 billion from them. Easily they can afford it when the 5 biggest companies alone made $75 billion last year after making $1 trillion over the last 10 years.
Certainly the budget cuts that are going to happen are being pushed by a group of folks who feel like budget reductions are necessary to balance the budget. We can't pay for it all.
Right, but shouldn't the big oil companies have made $1 trillion in profits over the last year? They made $75 billion last year at a time when the rest of America was suffering. We had 9.5% unemployment. We've got record numbers of people Shouldn't they kick in?
It's easy to attack oil companies when they're paying a significant amount of taxes already.
They pay less taxes than the average family.
That is not true.
You can go look it up.
That is
their
not
effective
true.
tax rate is about 10% for Exxon Mobil last year.
That is definitely not true.
Go
and
look at
they're contributing to state taxes. They're contributing to taxes at the pump.
So
they're
are people
contributing
getting benefits
across
from
the
other
board.
programs?
And in fact, they're big taxpayers. And certainly, if you attack oil companies, the people who are going to end up paying are you and I. We're already getting more dependent on foreign oil because we're blocking a lot of offshore drilling. We're blocking a lot of the
Frank,
domestic.
That's not so. If you look at if you look at the Energy Information Agency, it predicts that the amount of production is going to grow twice as fast over the next 10 years compared to the amount of demand.
We just
let me step in and
That's
try
why
and
we do
solve
your
this
comment.
argument,
Sure.
though, Dan, because just this past week, we talked about this in Plugged In, the Wall Street Journal reports ExxonMobil is having a difficult time finding oil. What's the solution? Do we need to get off of oil? Do we need to drill in more in new places? Or is it a combination of both?
Well, I certainly think that one of the problems that the oil industry is having now is this political and areas, and secondly, regulatory challenges that they're facing in areas where we should be drilling. Look at we've got a vast amounts of oil in Alaska. We've got vast amounts of oil in the Gulf of Mexico that have been off limits for the last year, basically, because the Interior Department doesn't want to issue permits.
Well,
and
you know,
because of what happened in
oil
the
spill
Gulf,
can
too.
ruin your whole decade. But it's also important to note that in the western Gulf of Mexico, 3 out of every 4 leases that have been leased have not been developed. Maybe there's oil there, maybe there's not. But they own leases that they're not developing. Let's focus on those places. Why would you go drill in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge? Would you put up a dam in the Grand Canyon to get electricity?
Well, I'll tell you this, Dan, I'm not a geological engineer, but I can tell you that if those oil companies at $100 a barrel are not drilling in those regions, there's probably not a lot of oil there. So, you know, the reality is we're drilling where we can drill, and there are more opportunities out there. If we want to really get off foreign oil, we've got to do a lot of things. We've got to do what Dan's talking about. We've got to do both the demand side and move electric vehicles forward, absolutely. We also have to get the development side.
I'm going to give you a shot in just a second, Dan. Just 1 second. I want to catch our breath for a moment because we're starting a new segment this week here on The Mix. A chance to talk about what got your blood boiling this past week, other than each other. What is it that really fired you up this week, Dan? Was it a policy move? Was it a statement made by someone on the Hill?
What got my blood boiling is that the Republicans in the House want to cut money that goes to low-income people to help them pay their electric bills.
Lie heap.
And goes to low-income people to help them weatherize their homes to make them more energy efficient. At the same time, they're keeping billions of dollars, $3.5 billion in tax cuts for ExxonMobil and some of the other richest corporations in America. So we're cutting money for the poor and making sure we keep the money for the best, the well-off. That really makes my blood boil.
I really think what got my blood boiling this week is the fact that sometimes the administration is saying one thing and doing another, and I know that's hard to believe that politicians would be saying one thing and doing another. At the time that this administration is demanding more renewable energy, more clean energy, more wind power, their Department of Interior just released a wildlife guidelines system that is absolutely detrimental to developing resources like terrestrial wind, perhaps even offshore wind, as we get into the investigation. So, and this was after a 3-year stakeholder process that included industry, that included environmental groups, that included regulators. They just completely disregarded that and put out what is a very onerous guideline that will in fact delay the development of renewables.
Maybe a microcosm of what's going on behind closed doors on the Hill right now. Daniel Weiss with the Center for American Progress, Frank Maisano with Bracewell, Giuliani. Thanks again, gentlemen. It's always good to have you with us.
It's great.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Wipe off that sweat. That was good. Well, tell us what you think of the budget proposals. What sector is getting too much or not enough? And what about the GOP proposals? You can email us at feedback@energynow.com, and we just might use your thoughts on a future show. Still to come, the battle of the big boys and their electric vehicles. We'll compare and contrast the Volt and the Leaf. Find out who's coming out on top.
No, what'd she say?
She said whatever.
No, she says that all the time.
What's that?
Hello? I'm on the phone.
Mom, I'm on the phone!
Hello? I'm on the phone.
Who's this? It's me. I'm on the phone. Mom.
Oh, you're on the phone.
All right.
Sorry.
Sorry. Anyway.
Who are you talking to? Kelly?
Mom.
All right.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of teens in foster care who would love to put up with you.
So we just talked about the president's budget and one area where there is a lot of funding growth. Money to increase electric vehicle demand, including a $200 million grant program to help communities invest in EV infrastructure. Also turning the current $7,500 tax credit for EV buyers into a tax rebate. That means you get the cash up front. Even before they hit the nation's showrooms back in December, both the Nissan Leaf and the Chevy Volt started duking it out. Energy Now's Lee Patrick Sullivan entered the EV arena literally to get a closer look at the battle to charge the road in this Energy Now Spotlight.
Ladies and gentlemen, in the blue corner, weighing in at 3,700 pounds with an all-electric range of 40 miles, the Chevrolet Volt. And in the red corner, weighing in at 3,500 pounds with an all-electric range of 100 miles, the Nissan Leaf. These two EV heavyweights have been going toe-to-toe for more than a year. Chevy led with an 8-year, 100,000-mile warranty on its lithium-ion battery. Nissan hit back and matched it. And the folks from Chevy reminded a gathering of EV enthusiasts in California who came up with the warranty first.
We also are glad to see that our friends at Nissan have come to the same conclusion we have, that warranties on these batteries are very important.
At that same conference, Nissan delivered what it thought was a body blow. An affordable $349 lease program. Within hours, Chevy delivered an uppercut, matching it. And the public battle has also been aimed at Chevy's EV credentials. The folks at Nissan have been taking jabs at the Volt's range-extending engine. It's gasoline-powered and allows the Volt to travel an additional 325 miles.
The real simple way to determine what's an EV and what's not is there gas on board. Yes, it's not an EV. No, it's an EV. Pretty simple.
Yep, he's talking about the Volt. And in case you missed the jabs at each other in their commercials.
So doesn't it just make sense that we build an electric car that goes far, really far?
What the Chevy folks are trying to say is after 100 miles of driving the competition, the Nissan Leaf, you'll be walking.
The 100% electric Nissan Leaf. Innovation for the planet. Innovation for all.
So according to the Leaf commercial, after 40 miles of driving a Volt, you'll melt the polar ice caps. But Nissan does bring up an interesting question. Can the Chevy Volt be considered an electric vehicle if there's an internal combustion component? To get answers, I went to Hamtramck, Michigan, outside Detroit. That's where the Volt is being built alongside Buicks and Cadillacs. Now, it may not look like it right now, but that right there is a Chevy Volt. This remote cart right here is going to lift up the engine into the Volt. And remember, this isn't a normal engine, it's a much smaller engine. It is used to charge the battery in the Chevy Volt. Think of it as an onboard power plant. GM says the engine never turns the wheels. That's done with an electric motor. And it's that range-extending engine that the folks at General Motors say will give the Volt a fighting chance when faced with consumers who have range anxiety when it comes to electric cars.
I've been here for 35 years.
But for auto workers like Larry Jones, it's the Volt itself that will give him a fighting chance.
A year ago, a lot of people here didn't even know whether there was going to be a General Motors. So a lot of anxious people, a lot of people laid off. But with this car, there's hope.
Speaking of hope,
we had the president here. I mean, that was probably one of the proudest moments of my life.
Last December, the Volt was brought to Washington, D.C., and I got to drive it. So I'll be able to tell my grandkids I drove the Volt before the president did.
Absolutely, absolutely. I did too.
All right. That test drive I was referring to lasted all of 20 minutes. Now, driving the Volt around the parking lot of RFK Stadium is one thing, but cramming my 6-foot 4-inch body into a car for a 5-hour drive, well, that's another. So I took Chevy up on its offer for a much longer ride. I drove the Volt from Raleigh, North Carolina to Washington, D.C. That's 277 miles. And the Volt didn't disappoint. It was a quiet, smooth ride. After 37 miles of driving in EV mode, the backup gas engine kicked on. And if there hadn't been fancy display graphics to tell me that there'd been a switch, I never would have known. But what about Nissan's claims that the Volt isn't an EV?
For the first 50 miles, 40 miles, it will be pure electric, engine will never come on.
As for the Nissan Leaf, for the first 2 years, it will be made in Japan. After that, it'll be made right here at this assembly plant in Smyrna, Tennessee. Right here, they're putting in the gas tank for an Altima. In 2012, that will be a battery pack for a Nissan Leaf. And like the Volt, the Nissan plant will be retooled to make the Leaf alongside other Nissan products, such as the Altima and Pathfinder. Those cars pay the bills, so Nissan wants the addition of the Leaf to be just another day at the office for its workers, and that transition is the job of Dan Herr. You're trying to make this so it's not such a big deal for the workers, but building an electric car is a big deal, isn't it?
It is, and if we kind of step back and think about it, it's an awesome opportunity to be part of the change in the industry.
I drove to the Smyrna plant in a Leaf, of course, and like the Volt, the Leaf didn't disappoint. It was a quiet, smooth ride and plenty of head and legroom. And this car is virtually silent. That noise that you're hearing is because the windows are down, but there's no other noise that the car makes except the rubber hitting the road. It didn't have as many gadgets as the Volt, but then again, it's nearly 10 grand less expensive.
From a technical engineering kind of standpoint, we wanted consumers to step out of their gas-powered car into this one and find it very easy to drive, very normal. A few new screens to look at and learn about, but really driving, one to the other, just step in and go.
And as for Larry Jones, he's seen the Hamtramck plant add shifts since they started making the Volt.
So this is clean, and this is new, this is state of the art, and this is the future. The future is now.
In Detroit, Lee Patrick Sullivan, Energy Now.
That electric vehicle ring is getting crowded quickly. More and more companies are now producing EVs. The question is, will you, the consumer, actually buy them? The Energy Now reality meter shows us that in January, GM sold 321 volts. Add that to the 326 sold in December, and you have a whopping 647 vehicles sold since the debut. As for the Nissan Leaf, it sold 87 vehicles in January, just 19 in December, a total of 106 cars. Ever found yourself in a hot, crowded train station or bus terminal? All right, forget about the smell for just a second. What about all that heat, that energy your body is generating, and how it's simply going to waste? Ever thought about that? Probably not, but one Swedish company has, and what they did about it is in this week's Hot Zone. Hundreds of thousands of people pass through Stockholm's central station each day, and everything they do generates heat. So the real estate firm Jernhusen has invented heat exchangers and put them in the train station's ventilation system. They're designed to channel that excess body heat into water, and that heated water is then pumped into a nearby building to keep it warm. Jernhusen says the exchangers have led to a 25% drop in energy costs for the building. So the next time you hear the adage, never let them see you sweat, maybe you should. You could become part of the grid. And that's it for this week's edition of Energy Now. You can also watch our mixed panelists continue their conversation in our green room. That's online at energynow.com. If you have any questions for our upcoming guests, let us know. You can upload your video questions or remarks to our YouTube channel, Energy Now News. Just give us your name and where you're from, and keep your remarks short, less than 30 seconds. You can also friend us on Facebook, just search Energy Now News, and join our discussion pages, or follow along with us on Twitter at Energy Now News. I'm Tyler Suiters. We're glad you're with us. We'll see you here next week.